Good afternoon, everyone. Oh yes, we are good to go. I'm Michelle Diller. I lead policy for our Green Communities and Building Resilient Future team. So I am charged with all the work that Jason was talking about this morning that we need to get done. We've spent the morning talking about health and energy as essential pillars of quality affordable housing, how energy efficiency and design strategies are expanding what housing can deliver, and how health-focused approaches support resident well-being. So resilience builds on both of these ideas, because ultimately a high-performing home isn't only efficient or healthy, it's a home that continues to serve residents safely and reliably over time, even as the conditions around it change. So when we talk about resilience today, we're talking about housing that can remain safe, livable, and connected to community when severe weather and natural hazards hit, whether that's extreme heat, flooding, high winds, wildfire, or another hazard. And that resilience matters most for the people with the fewest options for recovery when those systems fail. So increasingly, the challenge isn't awareness of risk. It's moving from reacting after damage occurs to designing, building, and managing housing that's ready for the hazards we already know are coming. Because when housing fails under stress, the consequences aren't abstract. They're displacement, loss, and instability. So today's conversation is grounded in real hazards and real decisions: what works, what still gets in the way, and what it costs when we don't act. To help us explore that, I'm joined by two industry leaders who bring complementary perspectives on resilience in housing. We have Jen Leone, Assistant Commissioner and Chief Sustainability Officer for the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, also known as HPD. She's been deeply involved in advancing sustainability and resilience through New York City's affordable housing programs, helping move the needle on efficient, healthy, and durable homes for New Yorkers. And we have Michael Newman, General Counsel for the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. IBHS is an industry leader in resilient building strategies that are grounded in extensive research, including the voluntary wind and hail-focused fortified designation and the wildfire prepared program. So let's get started. Let's begin on the Optimist platform that Sean talked about this morning. Let's begin with what's working. From where you sit, what progress have we made in designing, building, or managing affordable housing to better withstand real hazards? And where do you see that progress showing up most clearly in practice? Jen, we're going to start with New York City.
Sure. So when I think about progress, at least in New York City, I keep coming back to a really simple idea, which is making policy where best practice is the default, right? Start there and everything else is easier. New York City did something really interesting. In 2017, they created the Climate Resiliency Design Guidelines, and it was just a starting point for the city. And they developed forward-looking maps and guidance for housing and buildings to be more resilient over time. So all of a sudden, we had science and data that we could look to make sure our buildings were going to be resilient from the get-go. But the Climate Resiliency Design Guidelines weren't scheduled to go into effect until 2026. What we did at HPD is when we rolled out our design guidelines in 2023 for new construction and existing buildings, and we did this in conjunction with enterprise through the New York City overlay, we embedded those best practices and requirements directly into our guidelines in a very prescriptive way. So we said all buildings need to design to the 2080 flood levels and elevate all residential uses and critical equipment and so on. And then we had, little less rigorous standards for existing buildings. And we were really concerned that nobody would accept this iteration of our guidelines. But we did. We had new leadership from Kim Darga. I'm just giving a shout out here. She started today at Enterprise New York City office. So really enabled us to embed this into our guidelines as a real mandatory requirement. And then what was really surprising is we put it out into the market and nobody flinched. They all said, this is great. Now we have rules, we have standards, and all of the housing development providers said we can do this, we'll make it work. Anything that doesn't work could be resolved through waivers. And we use that waiver process to learn the nuances of what doesn't work for embedding resiliency. So here we are in 2026, and we have a really good set of strategies that we already know is proven. So when the law goes into effect later this year, we know exactly how to do it. So that is something we are really excited about, is like prescriptive baseline requirements. But you need the backup data and science and local information to make that work.
Right, great. Thanks, Jen. Speaking of data and science, Michael, I know you're more from the wind and hail and wildfires where IBHS has really focused so far. So what's starting to work in practice?
Yeah, so first let me just say thank you, Michelle and Krista and Sean and the whole Enterprise team. What Enterprise has done today and really every day is ask the hard questions and bring solution sets for them. And the green community is such an important part of that. Because the scale of the problem is big, right? Last year, 2025, we had $40 billion loss in the LA County wildfires. We have, for the last 3 years in a row, had more than $50 billion in insured losses from severe convective storms across the center of the country. And really, the only reason it wasn't seen as a worse year is because a couple of hurricanes went this way instead of that way. And so the scale of the challenge today, let alone what severe weather will be like in 10, 20, 50 years from now, is real. It's a big problem. But to echo something Sean said earlier today, solutions do exist and they exist right now. So at IBHS, we're able to recreate severe weather and then conduct full-scale testing of the built environment, the residential and commercial buildings where we live and work, so that we can identify mitigation actions that are affordable, that are achievable, and that are accessible to people. And that is what underlies our Fortified program for wind and hail and our Wildfire Prepared program for wildfire. And these programs really do work to reduce risk. I want to tell you a story about a building super in Lockport, Louisiana. He lived in a LIHTC supported program, or excuse me, LIHTC supported housing. And when Hurricane Ida came, he lost his home. In fact, everyone who lived in that building in Lockport, Louisiana lost their home because in a very classic thing that we see in the lab and in the field over and over, the wind attacked a structure, ripped away the roof, ripped away the walls. Well, just a half mile down the road was another project. It was, in fact, the first project to be built to the fortified multifamily standard. It was about 95% complete when Ida hit. And aside from some very, very minor damage, it was fine. And so that superintendent and many of his neighbors ended up moving down the street, moving into this new project built by the same developer in the same location. So these very basic mitigation actions really do work. I'll just close with one other quick story. There was a study that was done last year, some of you may be familiar with it, looking at Hurricane Sally. It looked at 40,000 property experiences in Hurricane Sally from 2020. And what it found is that a fortified designation reduced claim frequency by 70%, reduced claim severity by over 20%. And so we have the proof points that these better ways of building structures, particularly housing, absolutely work. And that puts families in a better position, it puts affordable housing operators in a better position, it really puts our whole society in a better position.
Great, yes. And I've seen the project that Michael's talking about called Les Maisons. Enterprise was proud to be partner and part of a policy pilot down in Louisiana where that development was dual certified to Enterprise Green Communities and has the fortified designation. And it had a few lighting sconces ripped off, was about all that happened in Ida. So it was really nice to talk to the residents that were there and the continuity of community that they were able to have. So thanks for that. So building off of what you've both shared, we're not short on building science or policy solutions for that matter. We largely know how to reduce risk. And yet resilience is still really hard to scale across affordable housing, especially across existing portfolios. So let's talk about where we still have work to do. So Jen, from an agency and delivery perspective, where do the resilience goals run into reality? And what's making it hardest to move from good intentions to actually getting those upgrades on the ground?
Right, so, you already said it, new construction's almost easy when you think about existing buildings, right? Before pencil hits paper, you do the right thing, you're kind of set. But most of us are in an environment where there's a lot of existing buildings with a lot of needs. And whether they're flood prone or heat prone or anything else, it's really hard. There's a lot of competing expenses. Our buildings are often not cash flowing well or negatively, right? So you're looking at a capital stack and you're really trying to think, how can I justify tomorrow's needs when I have so many today needs to cover? And we face that all the time in all of our deals. We don't have a lot of time. We're trying to move quickly. We have figured out that we can identify where resiliency overlaps with capital needs or energy needs and other things, right? And those are the really good wins where we say there's a capital event happening, we'll do the right thing. And we kind of have the data and we know what we need to do, but it still costs more in many cases, right? Costs more up front. And we're seeing a lot of this, especially with building electrification, for instance, where it's costing more long term. So the missing piece of the economic puzzle is what's the value for the resiliency? We don't have really good metrics for that. So we can't plug in the, well, but for this loss valued at X, we can make the math work. So until we have that and we can really see a reduction in costs on the, say, insurance side, or some other benefit that we can put into a capital stack or a long-term analysis, it's really hard to justify doing the right thing for tomorrow when we really have to focus, as I said, on today. So that's a really challenging thing, and it's why we continue to see buildings kind of kicking the can down the road when they can't really afford to do so.
And Michael, from the insurance and risk side, we hear a lot about the gap between mitigation and how it shows up in either underwriting or pricing. So how do you diagnose that gap today? Is it a data problem, a verification problem, a communication gap between what housing providers are doing and what the insurance industry needs to see? What's your take?
Yes. Insurance is a really complicated industry that's based on a really simple principle. There's money that everyone puts into a kitty, and then those that need it when they have a claim get to take money out of the kitty. I mean, that's the basic principle. So it follows that as more and more funds are coming out of the kitty, more and more funds have to go into the kitty. And that's what's actually driving a lot of the affordability challenges around insurance today. Rising risk is absolutely one of the factors affecting availability and affordability of insurance, but it's one of many. We've got inflation, we've got the rising cost of labor and materials, in no small part due to federal policies. We've got rising valuations. We've got the impact of litigation and the rising costs of that. So, and then there's the regulatory environment, which for insurance, actually there's 56 different regulatory markets in this country alone because of the way we regulate insurance. And so all of those factors are affecting the price of insurance. They're the very same factors, frankly, that are affecting the building industry and affecting the housing industry. But of all of those, the risk is really the only thing that a homeowner or a property owner has some level of control over. And I can't impact the interest rates. I can't impact the litigation environment. I can't impact the rising cost of labor and goods, but I can reduce the risk on the property that I own. The challenge that we often see is the disconnect between the actions people take and the insurance industry's understanding of them. We see this on the West Coast in the wildfire context. We see this all over the country in affordable housing. I did X, Y, and Z. Why am I not seeing a reduction in the cost of insurance? Why am I not seeing more available insurance? There's a Zen cone. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, doesn't make a sound. Well, let me make it much less poetic. If a property owner reduces their risk, but doesn't do so in a way that is verified and then able to be transmitted to the insurance industry, have they reduced their risk? It's much less poetic. But it does get at a basic truth. Risk reduction needs to be science-based, it needs to be verified, and then it needs to be translated to the property insurance industry in a way that they can ingest. It's why IBHS programs, like Fortified and Wildfire Prepared, have been a proven solution to increase the availability of insurance, in some cases to reduce the cost of insurance. Now, it's not a silver bullet because there are all those other factors in play, but having conversations with your insurance broker, have them have conversations with your carriers to understand what it is that you can do that will be understood and reflected in the underwriting and the pricing of insurance is really, really important. And I think too often those conversations are missed, and that's a missed opportunity.
All right, thanks for that perspective. So we've talked a bit about some of the solutions, some of the science, things that we have out there. We've talked about some of the challenges, where we've had some of the costs, where we're seeing where we need to do some work. But let's take a minute and step back and talk about the cost of not doing this. If we don't invest in hazard resilient housing, what's that mean for residents, for owners and operators, and for the systems that you work within? Michael, I think we're going to start with you on this.
Yeah, a study came out just last week out of California. It was the Senate Bill 254 study that looked at natural catastrophe issues across the state of California, and it really looked at across a systems approach. And one of their core findings was that the cost of inaction is greater than the cost of action. And I really think that's what we have across the country when it comes to the risk of severe weather and climate change and the resilience of the built environment. One, housing supply, right? It's a topic that's on everybody's tongues. A study came out a few years ago that found that we lose the equivalence, of 1 month of new construction in this country every year from severe weather, from natural disasters. Which is to say, at a time we need to be racing forward, we're actually losing ground every year because of the building supply that we are losing, the housing supply that we are losing from severe weather. So if we don't address resilience, we're going to continue to tie our hands when it comes to housing supply. Second, for owners and operators, developers of affordable housing, it is simply about how well can you keep running your business. Yes, margins are incredibly tight and upfront costs are hard, but we need to think about the operating expenses, the cost of insurance, the rising cost of deductibles that make a claim more expensive than ever. And then if your building is destroyed so that your residents can't live there anymore, are you out of compliance with your LIHTC requirements in some really difficult situations? And then finally, and really most importantly, it is about the tenants. It's about the families that live in affordable housing that are probably not as able to rebound from severe weather, to recover from the displacement, from having to move away from their community, from their kids' schools, from their jobs, who don't have that broader set of resilience, right? Like kind of big R resilience that extends beyond the built environment. And we need to think about them and what are the ways that they can be best served. And the price of inaction is borne by them.
Yes, definitely. And Jen, you and your agency are charged with making all of that work. I'm sure you've seen when you haven't been able to get it done, or the challenges of getting it done, kicking it down the can, having to find the money to get things done. So what's your perspective on this?
I mean, you really took the words out of my mouth. There's really nothing more to talk about, right? We lose supply that we're desperately trying to build, right? And that's, at least from the city perspective, all of our subsidy, which is hard won and not ever sufficient, just going to doing something and you're pouring it into a leaky bucket, right? And the more we do that, the more we're just wasting resources. And that's really hard to think about. But it's also hard to elevate that, you know, across the boards when we know how to do something, we have a path, we have a protocol, and we need to spend money and fix things now. So being able to make that message really resonate all the way at the top is important. And then really the tenant side of things it's that community loss, and this kind of goes back to the health and safety and well-being of the residents. It's all of those things you said and more, because that's who we most care about. We're doing it for the people, and when people lose their homes, their neighborhoods, and everything else, we've just not achieved our goal at all.
And I think we heard all of that as we were developing the 2026 Green Communities criteria. We had resilience back in 2020. We really tried to take the next level with that and provide criteria in there for people to move forward on heat stress. We have site design ones for flood, wind, and wildfire now. So I'm really excited to see people take those tools and be able to move them forward. To that note, I want to build upon what Sean's mentioned this morning about the next 20 years. So from both of your perspectives, what does success look like across the next 20 years? Jen, I'm going to turn to you.
Right, so hardest question last, of course, because I think if we really knew all the answers, we'd be maybe doing them. I think from the policy perspective, of course, that's where I sit, we really need to be thinking not at the building scale only, but the community, city, and neighborhood scale. I went out of order with that. It's important not to put the burden of doing this on every individual building. For one, that will never work. There's never going to be enough resources for every building to take on the burden of becoming resiliency in this environment with, grids that are not super efficient or effective, increasing weather and climate, as I said, minimal resources and so on. Like, not every building can do everything. Plus, we have capital cycles that don't necessarily always, time with the needs of dealing with different risks. So I think really policies need to be created, enacted, and so on at a lot of different levels, federal, local, state, that optimizes our existing resources, right? We can't just keep going on as usual and saying we're gonna do things in this environment and not fix the underlying problems. We also need to prioritize investments, right? And this is where we need really community-specific data and science. We have to know, to your point, like, what do we need to be doing that's really underwritable and really functional? We can't just guess at what the good investments are. We need to know where to do them, right? Some neighborhoods maybe are not the best place to be putting better, more resilient buildings, because in the long run, that's not going to lead to better, more resilient neighborhoods. So optimizing our buildings, I said that, with efficiency, demand response, and so on. A lot of work around energy grid. I mean, that's a big underlying factor for energy burden, which is a resiliency issue, building electrification, which factors into resiliency, and just that safety of residents and, power continuity. That's really important, and we're starting to see a lot of legislation get proposed about making grids more efficient rather than spending money for just mass upgrades in infrastructure. So we need to see things like that so that all of the costs for doing resiliency work is not just falling on building by building capital cycles and capital work. And finally, I think sharing resources, and that is sort of, oh my God, of course, there's
we have a
weird
fly.
bug here. Yeah, we will have to deal with, other insect-driven resiliency issues. So I wanted to make sure I
This is like that vice presidential debate a few years ago with the fly going around.
And one of the World Series games. But the other thing is sharing resources. It's important, we're starting to see more interest in things like community resiliency hubs, where a building who's already creating a resiliency hub for its residents can then support a wider community. And these are incremental investments that can be really impactful at scale. And right, you don't have to do one thing in every building if we are sharing resources like that on the buildings that, have the opportunity and funding to make their, efforts go further.
Great, thank you, Michael. I'm gonna let you bring it home.
No pressure.
No.
So the next 20 years, there was a word that keeps coming up today, and that's scale. How do we go from making green, healthy, resilient buildings and homes from the outlier, from the niche, to just the way things are done? And that's both our challenge and our opportunity across the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years. And I think we do have the building blocks in place to make that a reality, or at least to start making that more of a reality. The first piece is simply awareness. And there is more conversation about making our homes, our communities better able to withstand severe weather, better able to withstand climate change than I have heard in many, many years right now. And I think the leadership of enterprise community partners in making resilience a more critical, essential part of the green communities criteria is just one example of how we're seeing the integration of resilience into housing conversations, into housing tools. So that gives me a lot of hope that we are reaching that moment of awareness that really matters. And yet it's not free. It is not free. And so we need to find ways. The question always is, who's going to pay? Everyone sort of acknowledges at this point there's a lot of co-beneficiaries to more resilient housing, but there's usually only one person who has to pay, and that's the asset owner. And so how do we find more ways to make that workable? I look to public investment, and I'll borrow from, I think, Jason from one of the previous panels who said, we should not be investing public dollars in the built environment if it is not meeting certain basic requirements. And I fully endorse that. We should not be building we should not be using public money to support housing if it is not capable of withstanding the severe weather we know it will face now, let alone across the usable life of that building. So we're seeing some really important movement. Before it sort of went away, HUD's Green and Resilient Retrofit Program was a great example. We see in state QAPs and states as disparate as Minnesota and Mississippi fortified being incentivized. We see the Federal Home Loan Bank System really stepping up with their affordable housing program funding. The Federal Home Loan Bank of Dallas was the leader, but now it's been joined by the Federal Home Loan Banks of Atlanta and Cincinnati in incentivizing fortified. So we're seeing this public money step forward. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the many states that are standing up grant programs to help single-family homeowners to put fortified roofs on their homes. But that's not enough. There's 148 million housing units in the United States. And we are about to celebrate 100,000 fortified designations. And we are very proud, and sometime soon you're going to see a big celebration from IBHS, and we should celebrate it. It's a big deal. But 100,000 against 148 million, right? So there is no amount of public money that will ever go to close that gap, which is why we need to catalyze the private sector. We need private funding, we need philanthropic funding, and we need, yes, public funding, all integrated to support the same basic types of building that will make our communities safer, make our homes safer. And I think we're starting to see that, particularly with CDFIs leading the way. But we need more of it. We need innovation, we need pilots, we need proof points, not on the science side, not on the building side, but on the financing side. And I think we're moving in that direction, but that's what it's going to take to really scale across the next 20 years. Now, IBHS is going to do our part. We are actively looking for ways to better streamline, to make it more affordable, particularly for affordable housing, to retrofit to our standards. Starting on June 1st, Wildfire Prepared is going to be available for multifamily housing for the first time. So we're going to be there walking with the housing community step by step so we can find ways together to move forward into a safer, more resilient future for our families, for our communities, and really across the entire nation.
Great. Yes. And Michael, we've been excited to be able to partner with IBHS and move those programs forward and build them into affordable housing. Jen, we've been excited for the long-running partnership with New York City and Enterprise Green. I want to thank you both for your perspectives today. Really just want to wrap up with saying today's conversations across the board, thank you to all of our speakers all day today. They really show that quality, affordable housing isn't just about energy, health, or resilience alone. It's about bringing all those elements together to really create homes that truly support residents and communities for the long term. And with that note, I'm going to turn it over for our closing remarks.